we are going to make a tier list. Rating all of the Pandemonium raids. Before we go through them in order, I need to make one very important addition to the tier list, which is P7S tier, because we're not going to do P7S, because it's going to go in this tier. It gets its own tier, because P7S is a fucking shit fight that doesn't deserve to be tiered at all. What a fucking garbage encounter. Oh my god. I don't think I need to explain why it's a fucking garbage encounter, but it is. It's just shit. What were they thinking? Not only is it a fight with the most boring mechanics known to man, but none of them happen until 8 minutes into the fight, and the one cool mechanic in the entire fight got cheesed week 1, and everybody did that as the PF strat. This fight sucks. And it's such a shame, because the problem is, I remember week 1 of Abyssos, right? And everybody was really excited about the tree because it was an interesting arena shape. And they were like, man, they could do so many cool things with this fight. They really could. They could do so many cool things with this fight. Everyone was excited. I was excited. Chat was excited. My group was excited. And then we pulled the boss. And we got the boss to like 50% in like 3 pulls. Because all of the mechanics were literally just, okay, if you guys die because they don't know what's happening, it's an in or an out, or some stacks or some spreads. Oh, there's a knockback too, amazing. All of the mechanics sucked. All of the mechanics sucked. It was just a fucking shit fight. What a bad fight. I have nothing positive to say about P7S. Nothing. It's not only the worst fight this expansion, it might be my most disliked fight since Alter Reuter at the start of Stormblood. It might be my least liked fight since then. I think this fight is an abomination. I'm not going to go as far as to say things like, oh, whoever made this fight should be fired, but they should never ever go back to this fight design ever again. I hate the current trend the FF14 fight design, especially in the first floors, have, where nothing happens for 2/3 of the fight. Like, nothing. They're normal mode mechanics, and then suddenly they just stack everything. And this is the worst offender in history. So, now that we've got the worst fight out of the way, we can do the tier list. I guess we talk about this tier first, right? I think that Eric is a C tier fight. I don't think Eric is a very good fight. I don't think it's terrible, but I don't think that Eric is very good. Here's my problem with Ericthonius. Ericthonius also suffers from the FF14 classic of nothing happens ever. There are 2 mechanics in that fight, okay? Everything else is not a mechanic. Mechanic 1 is the fucking chains, which happens twice. That's the first mechanic. Mechanic 2 is Intemperance, and PF decided to take the damage down for no reason at all. I still to this day don't understand why. They were easy mechanics, but they were fun to do. That's why it's not D tier. I think from a fight design perspective, I might even put it in D tier, but the execution was just fun enough that I don't think it was a shit fight. I just think it was really, really average. I'm trying to think back. What were the first fights of each expansion, right? The first fights of each expansion, we had Eden Prime, we had Alter Reuter, and we had this. I think Eden Prime was a much better fight than Ericthonius. I think if we compare first turn Savages, Eden Prime was so much better, it was unreal. Both in terms of execution, in terms of like reclearability, in terms of both prog difficulty and prog fun. Eden Prime was so much better. And Eden Prime was a really good idea. It was a really good designed fight because of the way that they designed it, right? They designed it around the concept of here is a simple mechanic, and then we are going to flip the mechanic later, right? We're going to make you do the inverse later. So we're going to make you do this set of simple mechanics for the first 3 minutes, and then we're going to flip them. I think that's good. I think that's good design. Unfortunately, Eric doesn't really have much that you think is, okay, this is interesting and this is fun, because a lot of it you could predict before you went into Savage, because it was just normal mode mechanics. Like, it's like left and in, right and out, you know? Like, that's the fight. So I think Eric is a very average fight. I don't think it's awful. I think it's very average. So I'm putting Eric in C tier. I think there are worse fights out there. The camp is another very simple fight with a couple of set-piece mechanics, right? FF14 loves to do this with the first few fights of a raid tier. They give you like 2 or 3 set-piece mechanics that fuck you up. And everything else is really simple, recycled stuff like stack, spread, in, you know, stuff like that. But, first of all, I think, is it dissociation? I think the key mechanic is called dissociation, right? Is it that? I think that mechanic is really fun. Especially when it culminates to where you have to, maybe it's flow, I don't know. Okay, you know the mechanic at the end where you have the tank tether and the group has to get ping-ponged across the arena at the same time? I think that is an incredibly well-made mechanic, because you have to think a little bit on your feet. It does a decent amount of damage. It's not like free. It's technically kind of a little bit cheesable, but also not really, unless you want to burn an LB. I think if they made it insta-kill you, if you fucked it up, even with tank LB, it would be even better, because groups just tank LB'd that, didn't they? And I liked that you could do alternate strategies for limit cut in order for the melee to stay closer to the boss for as long as possible, because you had to position while it was uptime, right? So you could do some interesting strats in order to let the melee stay on the boss longer. Phoenix. P4S PF was lit. Okay, the Phoenix can go here. Phoenix is a B tier fight. You want to know the... Sorry, it's Phoenix. There's a few reasons that Phoenix is worse than the camp. Number one, the visual clarity in that fight is awful. It literally hurt my eyes to do. I did not enjoy it. 90% of that fight is fucking light party stacks or spread. That's like everything. I also didn't really like Elmo strat. I didn't think Elmo was a particularly good strat. I can't even remember it now. I just remember at the time not thinking that Elmo was very good. And there were so many people that were like, Elmo's so good. Elmo's the best. I don't even remember how Elmo strat worked. I just remember on content thinking, oh, it's just not very great, is it? Fire tornadoes, on the whole, really fun mechanic. Really well designed mechanic. The funny thing about P3S is it was a fight that was literally built for one healer, right? You remember the last flame mechanic near the end of the fight, where Astro was just so much better than every other job, because it gave you a healing down debuff and a white hole mechanic, and expected everybody to be fully topped during the cast, while also, literally 2 weeks ago, having just given Astro a button that insta-heals people to full HP if they take damage beforehand. It was so like mind-boggling that they did that. They were like, okay, well, why don't we make a mechanic where Astro is better than all other 3 healers put together, just for the memes. But yeah, this was spread and stacks the fight, a lot of it. I didn't like that they just constantly did a bunch of spread and stacks. And PF had so much trouble with the spread and stacks. I think that this fight, though, it has pretty good pacing on the whole, which is an issue that a lot of Savage fights have. They have really bad pacing. But this one has decent pacing. So I think it's B on the whole. I think it's B. It's better than Eric. It's better than Eric. It's B. I think it's B tier. I thought that this fight was really uninteresting. I thought this was a really boring fight conceptually. Because Pinax or Penis or Pinax or whatever you want to call it, I like the concept behind it, but that's all this entire fight is, right? This fight really suffers from being a door boss. Because the concept of Pinax is really cool, but the actual execution of how the mechanic plays out really sucks. Because, okay, number one, I hate fights that have one pattern that is way better than another one. And this fight has one pattern that's really, really free and easy and nice for uptime, and then one pattern that sucks. That's how this fight is. It has one good pattern and one bad pattern. And that's just how it is. And I don't like that. Secondly, I feel like Pinax itself is really boring to do once you know how to do it. I never had fun doing Pinax after like lockout 1 of P4S Pro. I just did it, right? I just didn't have any fun at all. And that's because I feel like they never really built on the normal mode mechanic. I thought that healing the fight was pretty fun. I thought it was a decent fight to heal. We can talk about the balls in a minute. I think that the tower and tether mechanics and shit like that, they were also okay conceptually, but they just didn't do much with it. With this roll can't do this roll can't do that. I thought that was a really interesting mechanic conceptually, but they just didn't do anything with it. When it comes to the orbs, I think the orbs as a mechanic was just kind of shit, because it really needed a second iteration that happened later in the fight where you weren't just rotating. It needed a second iteration later in the fight where you had to do something more involved in order to make it a good mechanic. It just didn't. So I feel like the biggest sin of this fight is that it's a door boss. So it feels like all of the ideas got placed in front of you. They were like, okay, here's a bunch of really cool ideas. Now do phase 2. That's what this fight is. They never do anything good with the ideas. Isn't Pinax 2 just the same as Pinax 1? Yeah. So, like, it was an okay fight, but I can't say it was a good fight, because I really would have loved to have seen those ideas actually explored, and it just wasn't. This fight's better. I put this fight here. This fight's an A-tier fight. I'll tell you right now, I think there are 2 S-tier fights this expansion. Number 1, I agree. It's too easy. On day 1, we could very easily have DPS deaths and kill it with no problem at all. This is also a problem with P12S, by the way. Like, it was undertuned. It was very, very easy to kill. Mechanically, almost all of the set piece mechanics were really fun, right? I like the nail tower mechanics. I like the tether stretches and like the delayed tether stretches. I've forgotten the name of the mechanic. It might be it was the 4th major mechanic, the one where you have to break your tethers in order to explode. Act 4, maybe it was Act 3, where you have to rotate around the boss, essentially, stretching your tethers to explode the towers. That mechanic is really interesting in execution, especially as a healer, especially in prog. It's a really interesting and fun mechanic to do as a healer in prog, because the group has total control over the incoming damage, right? Curtain Call is also cool. This Curtain Call is the type of mechanic that FF14 really hates doing for some reason, where the group has total control over how they do the mechanic, right? You can do different timings, you can delay or push forward a stretch earlier or later if you want, based on the incoming damage. You can do a bunch of stuff with the timings of it, right? In order to help the group. And FF14 normally doesn't really like to give you that much choice. Yeah, you could also, if you had enough mitigation, yeah, you could also pop it all at once. And I really like mechanics where they let the player feel really good for doing smart stuff. And that mechanic makes you feel really good for doing smart stuff. I also felt like Act 3 was very fun in execution as well. Because there were so many... Basically, I really like mechanics where there's a bunch of ways to solve them and there's a bunch of ways to execute them. Okay? That's what I like. I like that. And this fight has a lot of mechanics that have multiple ways of solving and executing them. And they feel fun to do. You can easily sum this fight up. It was pretty easy, but it was fun to do. And I do agree This is totally mostly a puzzle fight, but I actually think that they went quite well in like a 60-40 or a 70-30 split between puzzle mechanic and execution. Puzzle fight and execution fight. Because this did have an execution requirement that I think was a lot higher than some of the other puzzle fights they've done. So I like this fight. I don't think it's the best fights, this expansion, but I like it. I think that I really liked Carbuncle a lot. I thought Carbuncle was a pretty great fight, actually. I thought it was a really solid encounter. Especially for a first turn. I thought Devour was fun. I thought most of the Ruby mechanics were interesting twists on a simple concept. I really like when encounters build on a concept rather than doing the exact same thing. Kirby also started the dumbass naming convention. That's a very valid point. That is a very valid point. They have like 5 fucking Ruby mechanics, don't they? I remember that. I don't have too much to say about this fight because I think everyone already knows the pros and cons of this encounter. There's like nothing to say. I thought it was pretty good. It was interesting to prog as well. I like mechanics. I like knockback mechanics, I'm not going to lie. I think knockback mechanics are really fun. And this has quite a fun knockback mechanic as well, even if it's very simple. Here is the problem with this fight. Here's the problem with this fight. The problem with this fight is that nobody remembers how to solve any of these fucking mechanics. Because they are all called the same bullshit. They all do the same thing. And the only way that I remember how to do this fight is just because I memorized it. Because to me, in my head, this is just one big mechanic. The entire fight is one big mechanic. Because I don't fucking remember what's going on. Because it's all called the same thing. You get the same icons. It does the same thing. The only thing you remember is Cachexia 1, and then you skip Cachexia 2. And on our clear, we tank LB'd Cachexia 2, I'm pretty sure. Because you don't need to do the fucking mechanic. Literally every week people were asked, what's next? Yeah, literally. You are constantly going, okay, what mechanic's next again? And luckily, there's probably one guy who remembers. Somehow, this one guy has like downloaded the fight in your group, and he tells you what's next. Nobody else knows. They're just like, I don't know, I'll just see what happens. I'll just see what happens. This fight was so one note, it was insane. But this fight actually hits really hard because we went through an entire raid tier of you literally not even having to fucking shield raid-wise or give a fuck about anything. And then this fight comes, it hits so hard for a second turn fight compared to what we've had for a long time. And I really like that about it. They actually tuned the damage really well here. This is the one I'm gonna get flack for. I know I'm gonna get flack. I think that P1, P8 is a great phase. I think it's great. Yeah, I like it. I think it's great. I fucking love it. And you know what else I'm gonna say? I'm definitely gonna get some flack for this. I think one of the reasons it's great is because it's actually tight on the DPS check. One of the reasons that this fight is great is because you can't carry 2 percentile Terry through the fight. One of the reasons it's great is because it requires at least decent execution from the whole party. That's one of the reasons that I like it so much. It was definitely the tier that showed the cracks in the balancing. I totally agree with that. But it wasn't like exclusionary to jobs. I think that was such a dumb take that people were starting to say. Because if you were enraging because you bought a certain job, there is another issue somewhere in that group. And that was the real problem. And I'm not saying another issue is in one guy wasn't playing perfectly. I'm saying one guy was playing significantly poorer than they should have been in order to beat the Enrage. Like, significantly poorer. I liked Gorgons a lot. I think Gorgons is a really fun mechanic, intrinsically. I quite like timer mechanics. That's why I like Curtain Call. I like timer mechanics. One thing that I think is really shitty about this fight is the fact that Dog 2 is a downtime mechanic. I think if Dog 2 was an uptime mechanic and slightly altered, I think a lot of people would have a much better time with this encounter. I really do. Because the reason that one pattern is so much better than the other is because one pattern has a downtime mechanic pushed way earlier in the fight, right? Which means that you have really imbalanced balancing on whether one pattern is good or the other one's good, right? And if I was to make one change to this fight, I would change Dog 2 to be an uptime mechanic. Because I think that Dog 2 would be a sick mechanic if it was uptime. This fight right here, if you were to ask me week 1 of Abyssos, week 1, I'd probably put it here. But because I have the hindsight of having re-cleared this fight, it's probably going to go like here. The boss fight ends at 40%, first of all. High Concept is great. Unironically, High Concept is such a fucking sick mechanic. I don't care that it's a downtime mechanic. They made a Hello World that is so fun. I really think it was so interesting to solve. I love the Phoenix concept. I love the fucking merging to make the Ifrits and then getting the 4 feathers and everything. I love it. I think it's amazing. But, you know, we talked about before having like a 60-40 or a 70-30 puzzle and execution. This one is 90-10. This one is 90% solving and 10% executing. It's so boring once you're really comfortable with the mechanics. There's nothing to think about. There's nothing to optimize. It really suffers from being so puzzle-centric. I like natural alignment. I think natural alignment is a good mechanic. I like High Concept 1. I think High Concept 1 is a good mechanic. I like High Concept 2, kind of, but that's only because of the Phoenix thing. I kind of wish they did something totally different for High Concept 2 and you would use that to obtain the Phoenix, but they didn't, which is a shame. And then the fight ends. The problem with this is it has so many good ideas and it executes on the good ideas, but then it repeats. And the ideas are so good that I genuinely think, again, if this wasn't a half fight, I think it would be like up here. If they really built on it, they just didn't. I think Cocytus is a C-tier fight, and there's a reason that I'm going to say it. I think he's better than Eric. I personally think that Eric is the worst first fight this expansion. Here is why I think it's a C-tier fight. Nothing happens until Levin Strike. Nothing. And then after Levin Strike, it gets a bit more fun. A bit. And then the fight ends. It's not as bad as, say, P7, because this fight starts 4 minutes in instead of, like, 6 or 7. I was really not expecting to say this. I told you that I thought this was a shit fight. And I would like to take that back, now that I've spent a lot of time in PF doing it. I kind of like this fight. I actually think this fight is an A-tier fight. I actually like it. It's grown on me. It's grown on me a lot. I actually like this fight. I actually fucking like Special Cells. I really like Pandemonium. I think it's so fun. Okay, so the thing about Pandemonium, right, is you either have a lot of fun doing the fight, or you get to watch people die in the funniest ways ever. In the dumbest fucking ways ever. It's so funny. There is not a single hard mechanic in that fight. Not a single hard mechanic. But the execution is just tight enough that PF just implodes at the concept of having to do it. I fucking love it. It's so funny. This is a fight that is 10 times better in PF than in a group, because watching people fuck it up is just as fun as doing it right. I love PFing this fight. I really do. It's so funny. Also, This fight is way more punishing than P11. There are enumeration mechanics in this fight for the stacks. The 4-man stacks are enumerations. The 2-man stacks are enumerations. In this fight, you can just mitigate through it, and it doesn't fucking matter. Why is this fight harder than this fight? I don't get it. But, yeah, whoever made them enumerations... Okay, promote whoever made them enumerations, because it's so funny. It's so fucking funny. It really is. It's just hilarious. The timings on this fight are actually pretty quick for a Final Fantasy XIV fight. They really are, especially a second turn. Like, the timings are almost as tight as what I'd expect from a 4th turn encounter. But yeah, this fight's really fun. Also, Harrowing Hell, what the fuck? Like, what the fuck is Harrowing Hell? Holy shit. Those guys were out for blood. Harrowing Hell is ruthless. That hits hard, man. If your group is not all paying attention and going, okay, Harrowing Hell is coming up in 90 seconds, I need to save my cooldowns and my MIT, then you have to tank LP. Like, if you don't have your MIT stockpiled, you just have to tank LP. It's so cool. I give it like a 9 out of 10. When I progged, I hated this fight because I was like, oh, it's just fast stacks and spreads and like, it's so boring. But then I learned to love the special cells, okay? I learned to love the special cells. This fight's so fucking cracked, it really is. It just gets more fun the more you do it, unironically. Here's the thing about 11, right? I'll put it here for now. I might move it up if I feel like it. Here's the thing about 11. The problem with P11S is that, unfortunately, it's a reskin. Because this fight's already in the game. If you're an Endwalker baby, maybe you haven't done this fight, but if you've been around for at least 3 years, you have done this fight before, because Thancred is literally just this fight, aside from the Dark and Light stuff. That's the bad part, right? The good part is that this somewhat follows on from P10S in that they do the mechanics fairly quickly. I like that they force you to do the pair mechanics and they don't give you like 6 or 7 seconds to do it. They're like, okay, you got like 3 or 4 seconds, just do it. You know? I think that the pacing of the in and pairs mechanics and stuff like that, and also the stack in and then light party stacks out, the pacing is quick enough that you can't be a lazy fuck. You have to have an instant prepped. I like light and dark as a mechanic conceptually and in execution because there's so many different ways you can do it. Basically, the sky's the limit with the execution. There's good strats, there's bad strats, there's all kind of strats. It's a great mechanic. The issue with this fight, aside from the fact that it's a reskin, is that they do so many random repeats. They do this weird thing where they'll be like, okay, here's a new mechanic. Let's do dark and light. What should we do? Or for example, let's do Shadowed Messengers. What should we do afterwards? I don't know. Just repeat like 2 mechanics before we do the new one. That's what they do. They're like, why don't we just repeat like 2 or 3 old mechanics for no reason at all? And they do it at the end of the fight as well. Why do they do it at the end of the fight? P12 P1 is a fucking sick fight. I love P12 P1. I think it's great. Before Hephaestus? Yeah, I'm okay with that. I think these are pretty similar quality-wise, personally. I think they're pretty similar quality-wise. The great thing about P12 P1 is it has elements of a puzzle fight. It has elements of an execution fight. It's really fun to reclear. The pacing when you're within a mechanic is really fast. Super Chain... Is it Super Chain 1? Super Chain 1, the actual execution is pretty quick. Super Chain 2A, the actual execution is pretty quick. You can't like fuck around for 5 seconds like you can in almost every other FF fight. You have to fucking go, you know? The ad phase is pretty interesting. Ad phase like fucked people over for a couple of hours trying to solve it. It was really fun to solve. It hits relatively hard. Again, we look back to when I talked about this fight, right? I said that this fight. One of the things that I liked about this fight is that the players had agency on how they solved the mechanic, or once they had solved it, how they changed micro changes within the strat in order to cater to how the pull was going. I really like fights that allow you to do that, where it's not very binary, do the mechanic or wipe. You can make small changes in order to adjust things, or you can make small timing adjustments and shit like that. I like that a lot. This fight has that too. There's a lot of different ways to solve the mechanics. There's a lot of ways that you can make other people's lives easier by doing something a little bit smart. I like that a lot. I like this fight a lot. I think this fight is really good. Really good. I wonder if they accounted for East-West Super Chain 2A. That's almost certainly an unintended strat. I don't think they accounted for it. But I like that it exists. I like that it exists. This is a really cool fight. The only thing I'd say about this fight, I don't want it much tighter, but I wouldn't mind if it was a bit tighter. It's the same for both. It's the same for both fights in P12. They're just a bit undertuned. They're a bit easy. They don't need to be super. They don't need to be super tight. But the fact that week 1 we were fucking re-clearing door boss with no dance partner on, a deaths and healer LB, is a bit much. I think it's totally fine to have a 4th turn that is clearable with like a death or maybe 2 at a push. But when so many things are going wrong and you can still beat the DPS check, I think that's a sign that it's undertuned, right? Problem with this is it's too puzzle solvey heavy, same as this fight. These two fights have the exact same issue. They're very puzzle heavy and not very execution heavy. Also, the reason that this fight is ahead of this fight is because this fight is so undertuned that it's a joke. It's not even, you know, when I talked about this being undertuned, this one is way worse. The UAV mechanic, so I understand why the UAV mechanic is in the fight the first time. I actually love that the UAV mechanic is in the fight the first time. It was a great joke, it's really funny, it's relatively easy to do. I assume it was a fairly late addition to the fight, probably based on the what happened with Top. It didn't need to be in the fight the second time. I feel like the second iterations of the mechanics should have been harder than the first iterations. And for example, in Caloric's situation, I think Caloric 2 is easier than Caloric 1. They're both easy, but it's even easier. I think that the second iteration of classical concepts is maybe acceptable, because they make you flip your thinking on your head, right? And that's it. Otherwise, it's the same. I think that's actually kind of an acceptable twist. But I don't know why the second UAV happens at all. There should be another mechanic instead of the second UAV. It's really stupid that they do a second UAV. And the second UAV is so easy that you can do it. You can one-shot it easy. It's like nothing. It's a nothing mechanic. But yeah, this fight's decent. It's alright. I really enjoyed progging it. It was really fun to solve and to prog. I like progging this fight a lot. Just like I like progging this fight a lot, but it falls off hard in reclers. It's just kind of boring in reclers. Is what it is, right? So, this is where I've put stuff. This is where I think the fights are this expansion. I will say, we're kind of blessed that I think that there are 5 fights that are at least good. I would say that a B tier fight is okay. Like, I can enjoy it. And I think that these 5 fights are all good fights. And these fights are all... These 2 fights are not good. These 3 fights are just kind of there, right? They're just kind of there. But the fact that there are 5 fights that are good and another fucking 5 fights here that are, like, pretty solid, I think that that's decent on the whole. I would definitely not say that Pandemonium was the best raid expansion ever. I think I would even... I put it below Eden. I put it below Omega. I put it below... Okay. I think this is the worst expansions raid since I've been playing the game. Okay, fuck it. There you go. That's how I feel about it. I think that this is the worst expansions raid since I've been playing. To do on content. But it still had a pretty decent selection. I really hope next expansion we'll have way more ANS tier fights.